we've just been such good friends for so many years.
Yeah.
And Duncan is just something else.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, no, I've enjoyed the show. Speaking of shows, welcome to the Big Questions podcast, where we talk about love, death, sex, religion, and all the big questions worth asking. I'm your host, Robert K. Elder, and today we're talking with David MacLean.
Hello.
He's the author of The Answer to the Riddle is Me. It's a memoir about amnesia, memory, losing, and then finding yourself. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's fair.
And David is kicking off his book tour Tuesday, January 14th at the bookstall in Winnetka for reading at 7 p.m. You might also want to check out columnist Mary Schmeek, who will read her new book on January 15th at the bookstall. And you'll find comedian Julia Sweeney at the Wilmette Library this Sunday, January 19th at 2 p.m. The Big Questions is sponsored by Shure, purveyors of professional microphones and headphones. Check them out at shure.com. That's SHURE.com. And The Big Questions is part of the Sun Times Media Locals podcast network. So, David, again, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And you have this really amazing story about losing your memory, and the short narrative is, and I'll do my best to do it justice, is that you were in India on a Fulbright,
Yep.
and you took an anti-malaria drug called Lariam, and it forced this amnesia, and you woke up on a platform, right?
Yep, on a train platform in Secunderabad, India.
Mm-hmm. And so my question is, what is the experience? How do you explain to people what amnesia feels like?
It's interesting because one of the things that I think a lot about is how is the teleological problem about a memoir, which is you've already lived through it and you're looking back at it. So how can there be any surprise for the writer? And if there's no surprise for the writer, there's no surprise for the reader. And so I remember this time when I was a kid, my parents had a stairway, because there were 2 floors and we had to connect them somehow. And there was a stairway, and my sisters would call from downstairs because something exciting was going on Square Pegs or Manimal. And I would run downstairs and I would slip at the top of the stairs and I would fall down the stairs. Now, falling down the stairs is interesting because there's a moment when you're falling down the stairs where it feels like you're flying. Mm-hmm. And then another moment where it feels painful and it hurts so much. And another moment again where it feels like you're flying and it's amazing. And then you get to the bottom and you're sort of like exasperated and you don't know what happened. And my parents would walk up to me and they'd say, "What happened, David?" And I would be like, "I don't know." And they'd say, "You fell down the stairs." Mm. And then I'd be like, "Right, I fell down the stairs." And that sentence then, "You fell down the stairs," then removes all of those micro moments that led to that. Mm-hmm. And my process in writing this was rediscovering all those micro moments, all those moments before the diagnose came and shut the door on the question.
Sure.
And I think the question is the interesting thing. It's sort of like, who are you when you're not you? Who are you? Are you even when you don't have any context for yourself?
Sure. Well, and you had described it previously as sort of a Rubik's Cube trying to reset itself.
Yeah.
So can you just, again, sort of talk about what that actual experience is like? What, does your mind race trying to give your surroundings context? What is it like?
Yeah, well, what you do is you end up taking whatever's at hand. So the first moment, and I remember this really well because it's like, I was thinking about daguerreotypes, where they... early photography where they soaked a copper plate in chemicals and then exposed it to the light, and then the image would sear onto the plate. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I was coated with chemicals, for God's sake. And then I just opened my eyes, and that train station is seared onto me. And that moment I remember really well because the first moment of waking up without any memory, I was kind of fine. Mm-hmm. Like I was fine. I was just sort of like looking around, and but once I realized that what was I going to do next is when like I freaked out. Mm-hmm. Is when I was terrified. And then my mind started racing. A tourist police officer came up to help me, and he said to me, "We get people like you all the time, drug addicts like you all the time." And as soon as he told me that, I was fine. Mm-hmm. So I constructed in my head a narrative of being a drug addict. I invented this woman, Christina, in my head, and a very ugly red-headed woman with nickel-sized freckles, who I would do drugs with all the time in India. She and I were just running around India doing drugs. Totally not true.
Sure.
Totally fabricated.
And that is the mind trying to fill out its own narrative, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That the one thing the mind balks at is not having context. And so it will try using whatever materials it has to create that context and reassert the ego in the face of the sort of chaos of the world.
And, I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand it because, we've seen, movies, and it's a trope in every sitcom about people, bumping their heads and then they bump their heads again. But, did you truly have no sense of history? Like, no childhood memories, what were there? There
was really, it's interesting because when I talk about it, it's difficult because there are different kinds of amnesia and different kinds, and it clearly didn't affect my language centers. What it was like was, and to be honest, there was spasms, and there would be times where I would remember stuff, and times when I didn't, and times when I would be totally confused again, and times when I did. It was sort of like this fugue state where my brain was just thrashing, and it's difficult to describe what it felt like because there are times where I was fine. I sent an email to my parents at one point, and so the question, of course, is like, well, how did you remember your email passcode?
Yeah.
I have no idea how I remembered it. But I could guess, and I'm almost positive of how I did it, based on what I bet what my hint was at Hotmail, which was Joni Mitchell, Never Lie, Yo, which is from a Janet Jackson song. Q-Tip says it. And they're sampling a Joni Mitchell song, Pave Paradise. And so, I bet that's how it happened. Because the passcode was based off of a Joni Mitchell song. So I bet that's how it happened. But I didn't write it that way, because that would have been a lie. That would have been, my speculation of how this happened.
Sure.
Instead, I sort of let the confusion in the book sort of stay there. That's going to drive a lot of people crazy. But, well, good, because it drove me crazy.
Right, because it's the experience. It reads like the experience of having amnesia. And if I'm remembering right, you talk about when yourself starts to come back to yourself is when you first see your parents. And so what was it about that trigger as they visited you in the psych ward in India?
When they walked through that door, it really was. It was like something just clicked out of all the spasming and all the craziness. Something clicked, and I saw them, and I saw the way they looked at me, and it located me in a way, and it found me. And not everything was there, but at least now I had the shape of what I was trying to fill. I still thought I was a drug addict. I kept apologizing to them for being such a terrible, horrible drug addict that destroyed their lives, which they thought was kind of funny.
And they didn't believe it.
Right, yeah, not at all. They were like, David, you're a dummy. Come on. And it's good that I have parents with a good sense of humor throughout this, because it has been less than easy for all of us.
And what was the year? Remind me of the year.
It was 2002.
2002. And you talk about Lariam again, which is this drug that they give to tourists and to soldiers, and it has some definite problems, and you've described it as sort of it's this thing that sits in your brain because it loves fat, and if one molecule goes out of place, it's like a snow globe shaking your identity. So my question, not knowing the science, is could that snow globe shake again? Do you still have valerium in your brain? Is this a repeatable injury? Oh,
I'm terrified of it all the time. So there are two theories. One is that is the lipophilic theory, is that once the Lariam leaves your body, you're fine. It's almost like food poisoning. You ate something bad, you just need to pass it out of your system. It just so happens it takes decades. The other theory is that it's just a neurotoxin, and it kills neurons, and it just lays waste to those areas. And so when the FDA put on the black box on the drug this summer, end of July, stating that some of the physical effects could become permanent, like that's when it was started to be really terrifying.
Yeah.
Because I feel like within a couple of years we're going to have psychiatric events become permanent as well. Because I'm still dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that feeling of at any moment a molecule could fall out of place and I'm a different person.
Mm.
Like, that's a terrifying thing to sort of live with.
Yeah.
And it's a terrifying thing if you, like, get food out of, like, the bins at Whole Foods. Like, that becomes a terrifying moment because you don't know what's in there anymore. Like, I for a while was very paranoid about what I put into my body and what other people had touched. I still can't drink out of another person's glass. But there is a sort of mild paranoia that has stayed. Because I don't know if it could ever happen again.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I want to circle back to that, but I also want to talk a little bit more about this journey to reclaim yourself. And so, your parents come, things start to come in waves. Is that how it works?
What happens is, like, when I would come into contact with something that I didn't know, because the real question is, how do you know what you don't know? Mm-hmm. And that's a really hard question. It's
I'm dealing with it now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. How do I know what I don't know? And that's what you're asked again and again with Larry. I mean, it's like, do you remember college? Do you remember high school? Do you remember? And it's just sort of like, I don't know what I'm not supposed to know. When I would come into contact with people or with the streets of my hometown, then stuff would trigger and stuff would come flooding back. And I would see the way people reacted to me, and so I would act that way, hoping that would just sort of solve this. Mm-hmm. But then it became clear that it just wasn't knowing, like, facts and figures about my life. It was a deeper sort of question about the emotional content, a question about intent throughout it all. A question of context that then I had to, that the performative aspect of just reacting to the way somebody treated me and just reacting to that wasn't going to cover. Like, I had to reclaim, like, terrible things I had done to people. I had to reclaim, like, my actions.
Well, and that's to me is a really central big question, which is, short of amnesia, can you change who you are?
Right. Yeah. Because people say that, right? They say, I wasn't acting myself. I wasn't myself that day. And it's like, well, actually, you're always yourself. Mm-hmm. Like, even when you're not yourself, you're yourself. That at that moment, you were given an allowance to be someone else, act like someone else, but that acting like someone else is part of who you are. Instead, we want ourselves to be a static thing that we can rely on, as opposed to, like, the crazy evolving, like, nonsense that we are. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to advocate that because it's not pretty. It's sort of like, and you're a chaotic being. We're all chaotic beings. Like, this is crazy. And then, yeah. Sorry.
Well, no. But it seems that you, you lost a couple of things. You lost an entire romance. You lost a relationship.
Yeah.
You found out that there were things about yourself that this new you didn't like very much. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what happened was the year prior to this, I found out through my digging, I had broken up with a long-term girlfriend and taken up with someone else. And I'd behaved poorly in that prior relationship.
And how old were you, by the way?
I was 28 when this happened.
Okay. Well, in your 20s, we all behave poorly.
Right. So, and so I started dating this woman named Anne. She was really great and really wonderful. But now that I look at it, I'm like, I bet that was a rebound. I bet that wasn't I don't know if that was really something, but I don't know. And so when I came back from India, she was still my girlfriend, and so she came out to visit me. And out of all of my friends, nobody came to visit me except her. But because I couldn't remember her or our relationship, I felt awful. Like I felt like I was doing like emotional damage to her.
Right. Well, that's an intimacy that you're trying to replace.
Right. And when she said she loved me, I had no idea who she was talking about. Like I had, like, are you loving? What me are you loving? Because I'm not sure about this me you're talking about. Because he doesn't seem okay. And so I broke up with her after she left.
Did you remember her? Like, that's the thing. Like, did
I didn't remember her at first.
Okay.
I saw pictures of her, and I was like, no, I didn't remember her.
And just out of curiosity, because this book is out now, have you heard from her? You know, what's her reaction to this?
Well, Anne's not her real name, because I was originally writing it, and I asked her if I could use her name, and she said, sure. And then she wrote back later, and she said, you never told me you were going to write about us having sex. And so then I changed her name. And she's a wonderful person. She's happily married to the guy she met after deciding that she and I weren't going to be together anymore. And she's really a dynamic, wonderful person.
That's got to be a really interesting thing from her perspective, because, you know, when someone breaks up with you, you know, it's for a reason,
right?
You know, between the two of you, or, you know, one leaves another person, or, you know, I have a friend whose boyfriend left her for a monastery, and we always joke that it's really hard to be, you know, mad at Buddha,
right?
You know,
yeah.
I can imagine it must be impossible to be mad at amnesia,
right? Well, it just sort of. Yeah, it's just a terrible thing. You know, that's also the year that, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind came out.
Yeah.
And so there are all these pop culture things that mock us, that mock me. I feel like I see them and it just hurts. In the same way, I had a friend whose wife left him because she started dating a woman. And everybody said, oh yeah, like Friends, like Ross on Friends. And that was like the most painful thing to watch. To be like, this is my fresh, horrible heartache. And you're saying it's David Schwimmer? Like, I'll stab you in the neck. Like, it's one of those things where it's like having hiccups. Like, everybody has an opinion on how you're going to cure hiccups when they don't have them. When you do have them, you want everybody to shut up, and so you can take care of it. But it's like this weird, the way people react to this has been funny. I mean, like, absurd. Absurd is a better word.
Well, and a few. I mean, and the book is very, very funny. One of the things, one of the sections that I love is describing about, again, your brain trying to make sense of itself, trying to give itself a narrative. And at one point, very, very early in your narrative, God in the form of Jim Henson takes you on a tour. Can you tell me that? So I was in the asylum at this point, and strapped down, and I was hallucinating quite heavily. And there was a guy. Well, so God shows up in my hallucinations, and he decides to take me on a tour of the cosmos, which is what God does when he shows up. And so we go see supernovas, we go see, this wild pyrotechnics of some interior subconscious of mine. And God is Jim Henson. Like, God looks like Jim Henson and is just kind and wonderful. And then all of a sudden he turns over and he flips a switch, and he said to me, I was like, where are we? We were a big airplane hangar, and he was like, I was like, are we in Hollywood? And he goes, no, we're in Burbank. And then so my mind was obsessed that I had to come up with a quatrain of universal significance that would allow me entrance into the next level of experience. And the first line of it was, if you can't understand that the entire universe was made in a studio in Burbank, then
and then it would finish on from there. And so like I would be saying this over and over again, and the people around me, they said I was the most entertaining psychopath in the mental institution in Hyderabad. But yeah, that's how Jim Henson showed up. And then it turned out what really was going on was there was a guy who was kind of chubby that my friend Veda had found at a library, who actually literally looked like Jim Henson. And he, just because Veda was worried that like I needed to see a white face, so he found the one white person he could find and brings him in, and Richard sits there, gives me cigarettes, and talks to me about his poetry. And he looked like Jim Henson. And so
was that a 1-to-1? So did you just implant that guy? Or because, we are men in our late 30s, Jim Henson was such a cultural influence, did it place him as God?
Oh, I think it was definitely like, if God's going to show up to me, he's going to show up as Jim Henson. Like, there's not even a question. Like, that's my best idea of what God is. Like, kind, but also a prankster. Mm-hmm. Like, kind, but with a deep knowledge of vaudeville.
But not Stan Lee,
right,
not Jack Kirby, not any of the other.
Stan Lee just steals from Jack Kirby, so no.
But God/Jim Henson also had a question for you. Am I remembering that right? And what was the question?
And the question it was sort of like, it was the question of the thing, I needed to repeat the thing he had told me before I was born. And it was this quatrain that would then unlock the universe for me. And he showed me the world in 4 dimensions, which was pretty cool. So I saw the world in 4 dimensions, and he said, this could be you forever if you can repeat this thing to me.
Right. You had to rhyme something with Burbank.
Right. So Burbank. And I couldn't, and it was driving me crazy. And so when I came to, I felt I had failed God. I felt I was a miserable failure. Not only was I a drug addict, but I had also failed God. And that sort of was where I built from there. And so in the book, people often talk about, wow, you seem like kind of a jerk. I will say, I was looking for evidence of me being a jerk. I was scouring the planet for people who would say I was a jerk, because God himself, as Jim, had told me I wasn't sufficient. And so that was my mindset. I was looking for people to tell me I was bad.
And there, I think we get to the sort of the central question, the core of the reason I wanted to talk to you, and that is just, how does memory shape who we are? Like that's the deep sort of, for me, the experience of the book and your story, that's the deep question, is how does memory shape the we that we, drag around with us? Right.
And how much of that is of identity is wrapped up in it, and how much of it is evolutionarily important that we forget? Like if we didn't forget things, no second children, right? There would be no second children. Yeah. Because nobody would go through that again. If you could actually remember what that was like, even as a father, like I don't know if I would want to do it again. And I didn't have the child. But there is something in our brains that is sort of like built to forget and to protect us in some ways. But also built into that is how much of that forgetting then is also self-protection. How much of forgetting what we've done is important to continue the sort of narrative, the self-serving narrative that we have to manage our days without going crazy.
Right.
And how much of that construction, once it gets peeled away, can you still function once it gets peeled away? And I found that you could function, but I was desperate to have it back. I wanted it back. But that's the only nice thing that come out of this for me in some ways is the fact that I got to see who I was objectively, and then realize how much of that was a choice and how much of it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk about that? What did you choose, and like how did you choose to change? What did you change about the old David?
Well, one of the things that was just root was that I was good with kids. Like, it's weird, but like even in the asylum, like I had the guy next to me was there because he had tried to commit suicide, and his son was there with him. His like 8-year-old son. And Amol and I were buddies. Like, we showed up, my parents showed up, and like Amol figured I had adopted him. And so like at root, I'm good with kids. There's one thing.
Well, and you also didn't. This is the thing that's very curious. Is you're obviously a talented writer before and after.
Yeah.
So it's weird that skill set sort of has carried through. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's almost like muscle memory. Like I'd been doing it for so long at that point, like it was instinct. It's also part of who I am. Like,
but it's a part you didn't seem to lose.
Yeah,
it's not something you had to rebuild, or did you have to rebuild it?
I definitely changed the way I wrote afterwards, and it took me years to do it. But I was in love with cleverness. I wanted to be smart and charming and clever. And I thought that was the way you wrote. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be Ben Marcus. I always wanted to be Ben Marcus, like just sort of like wildly intelligent, blisteringly like changed the way our relationship to language was. And then at some point I had to realize that that's just not who I am.
Sure.
And that I was just trying to imitate what somebody else did. And so like I had to really come to this reckoning with the way I wrote, that I had to write about myself, that fiction in some ways wasn't going to cut it.
Right. Back to my original question, which is, what did you choose to strip away? So you had a choice between the two Davids, the David that you were becoming, and you found some things you didn't like about that guy. So what did you leave behind?
I think I decided that I was done, and if I have a couple of drinks, it comes back. I was done like needing to be petted all the time. I was done needing to be hugged after every sentence. I was done sort of needing that sort of constant strokes in order to maintain a positive sense in the world. And looking through my life prior to that, it just seemed like it was all punchlines. And it was someone who only felt safe when he could tell a joke. And that sort of person I've let go for the most part. As soon as I get defensive, I go back to that person. But like I've really made this commitment to not have that as just a crutch. It was a personality crutch.
Well, and you talked about your daughter briefly, who's going to be a year old. And right now you're in the parental sort of safety zone because it's about like age 3 when our permanent memories start to form. Yeah. But how much do you think about that, watching her grow up, about like what her first memories would be, and how that, you have a very unique perspective after going through this to watch somebody grow up and form language and memories.
What's great about having a 10-month-old, and I will say this very evident, is that every moment is something totally new. And every moment is this other thing. And in some ways, like, I know in the back of my head she's not going to remember any of this. And in some ways that makes it better, because it's just sort of like, we just get to hang out, and like what happens, and it's rad. And really the 4 minutes she spends on the swings is like 4 minutes of the purest ecstasy that anybody has ever had. Like, I watch her on the swings and I'm like, how does that work? And while she's on the swings, she's not worrying about not being on the swings. She's on the swings. Mm-hmm. Whereas often, like in the middle of a very happy experience, watching Guided by Voices at the Argonne, I will think about, well, the show's going to be over, and then I might want to get some pizza. And while they're playing my favorite song, I'll be like manipulating like the future time in front of me so I can plot it out well. To see a being not do that and hang out with that person a lot is great.
Well, and again, I want to bring this forward as much as possible, but having this, I don't know if you feel if it hangs over you, this possibility that more Larian will shake down, but at this point, what memories would you be frightened to lose? Those you've formed since India. What do you think have been your most formative experiences and memories?
Courting my wife, without a doubt, was one of the most formative experiences that I've ever had. We came on an accident site in West Texas. Two motorcycles had hit each other, as if that's possible, but it had, and we were the first car on the scene. So my wife put the car in park and jumped out. Like, while I was still trying to figure out, like, what had happened. Like, she jumped out of the car. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's what you do. And seeing that has been one of the most formative things for me. I went to Sri Lanka after the tsunami in 2005. I was there from February to May, and the tsunami had happened right around Christmas of 2004. And being there and trying to help, and sometimes not being successful and failing, and trying so hard to be helpful, is there. And then coming back to the States, and I lived in Houston at the time, and Katrina had just hit, and so I worked in the Astrodome. And those memories are really formative to me. Yeah. Like, the smell of the Astrodome is still really formative to me. And to see...
And you're talking about, like, sewage and
right.
Rubble, and right? Is
well,
that what it is?
No. Oh. So in the Astrodome in Houston, where a lot of the refugees from New Orleans
I'm thinking about New Orleans.
Yeah. Came. And so what happened was the people who donated food and drinks to it were Coca-Cola, Chick-fil-A, and Dunkin' Donuts. No, Krispy Kreme. And so the place not only stank of people who didn't have access to washing machines, who were wearing clothes that were like a week, 2 weeks old, it also stank of people who were eating nothing but Chick-fil-A and drinking Coca-Cola. And there was just this sort of overwhelming smell to the place that was really difficult. But there was also moments of just seeing people reconnect, seeing people find each other, seeing people be successful even among that, has stuck with me. Mm-hmm. I would be really, really sad to lose that.
And what is your relationship with your memories now? Because it's really interesting. Again, I want to know the exact drug and dose you took to meet Jim Henson as God. but also, your mind made up a whole person to connect the dots. You had this hallucinatory fourth dimension tour. How do you sort of reconcile that with real memory? Just because I don't think many people have that experience. What is that like? Are they sort of different gradations of truth, or so tell me what's that like? How do you shuffle through it?
I feel like one of the things I feel like I learned is that so much of memory is just narrative that we tell ourselves in order to have those sort of foundational events that you just sort of asked me about, to say this is me, this moment in the Astrodome is me. And it's like, well, actually, it's not. It's not. And if that was wiped away, I'd still be fine. I'd be bummed that I didn't have it, but I'd still be fine in some ways. Like, one of the things I've learned is that the self is so fungible and so changing and changes every moment. There's the old saying that you can't step into the same river twice because the river is moving past so fast. And you're also never the same person stepping into the same river twice. Like, on a cellular level, you're shedding and rebuilding
every
so
7
often.
years, apparently.
Right,
yeah.
Every 7 years you're a radically new person, which means every moment you're a fraction of a new person. And so I feel like one of the things that I've realized is that even our bad memories, the memories of trauma, those memories are in some ways, we keep them around because they provide a narrative for who we are and make us feel safe and located in the world. I am a victim. I am a hero. I am these sorts of things. I can lay them out. These are obstacles that I've overcome. These are things that I've failed at. And it's the truth of the matter is you're none of those. That in some ways you are this other thing that is using those events to feel safe. And so what I'm interested in is, what is the thing that I'm protecting? What am I afraid of that is using this whole narrative memory system in order to protect? And this is where it gets weird, right? It's like, well, then what are you? And the thing is, I don't know, but I feel like I've gotten a sense that it's something. Mm-hmm. Like it's something different. It's something different than the chores I'm going to do today. It's something different than I'm not a believer in a higher power, but I am a sort of believer that there is a essential part of ourselves that has been there since before we were born. Mm-hmm. And that in some ways, if that's DNA or if that's the breath of God, I'll let other people wonder about that. But I really feel like there is something essential that's outside of our circumstance.
And did this experience form that in you? Did that, is that conclusion a byproduct of what you went through, or?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Right. So there, good. Yeah. No, you're right. That there is an absolute contradiction in that. That's good.
Well, I'm not saying it's a contradiction. I'm just saying it's a path arrived. You know?
Yeah. No, it's totally a contradiction. Right. It's. Huh, that's good. I got nothing on that. That was sharp.
Well, no, and I'm coming back just because I would be remiss if we couldn't complete the narrative because I'm interested in your wife Emily. She jumps out of the car. What happened? Complete that narrative for me.
So there were two women who were, when we first walked up, there were two women who were hurt. That's what we saw. What we didn't see was that one of the women was on a motorcycle with another guy, and the guy was down the
ravine.
Yeah, in the ravine. And so, Emily ran to help the woman farther down. Her name was Gigi, if I remember right. She and her husband were on two different motorcycles, and her husband was fine and was running up to help Gigi. I was with Alma, and Alma was on a date with the Joe who was in the ravine. Alma she was 42, something like that, wearing booty shorts and espadrilles, which is not what you want to be wearing when you're in a motorcycle accident. So she was just
road rash.
Yeah, she had probably gone about 30, 40 yards
yeah.
On her booty shorts. But all of them were wearing helmets, so it's not as bad as it could be. So I ran up to help Alma, and Alma was a bloody, bloody mess. And I had no gloves. I had nothing. And so I was trying to not touch her while helping her. And then she fell into my arms. And I ended up holding Alma in my arms for 2 hours. Because we were right underneath the telescope there in Fort Davis. And the nearest phone was 20 minutes away, and the nearest ambulance was much further. And so, sitting in the West Texas sun for a couple of hours, holding a stranger bleeding into you, ruining a favorite shirt of mine, you just realize that, all the other stuff of our lives, our plans, all of that stuff is sort of, when confronted with someone who needs help, stops being important. The only thing is helping that person. And that's the only thing that's important at that moment.
So this has been David MacLean talking to us about his new book. Again, he's going to be at the book stall on Tuesday, January 14th. Again, this has been the Big Questions podcast. We're part of the Sun Times Media Local Podcast Network. Music by Hernan Sanchez. Again, I am Robert K. Elder. David, thank you for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob.